My name is Tessa Rowan, and I used to believe that loyalty was rewarded. I built my career on that belief: early mornings, late nights, every project signed off with my name in fine print but never in headlines. I was the silent architect behind someone else's empire. That someone was Evelyn Drake, my mentor, my idol, my boss. CEO of Drake & Vale, one of the most respected strategy firms in the city. She was brilliance wrapped in precision. Charcoal suits, diamond pens, a voice that made men twice her size listen. I was her shadow for nearly a decade, her right hand, as she told clients. But hands, I learned, are easy to sever when they start reaching too far. It began with a simple discrepancy. A missing report. A contract renewal that should have landed on my desk. I brushed it off: clerical error, I told myself. But then it happened again. And again. Clients I'd brought in were suddenly being handled directly by Evelyn. Projects I'd led for years vanished from my access overnight. I confronted her once, cautiously. She smiled, that slow, deliberate curve of control. "Tessa," she said, "you've outgrown operations. You're too valuable to be in the weeds. Let me handle the paperwork." It should have been flattering. It felt like a dismissal. The turning point came 3 months later. I arrived early for a quarterly meeting and found a folder left on the conference table: Drake & Vale Confidential, embossed in silver. Inside was a proposal for a merger with Valincorp, the tech consultancy we'd once rivaled. The shocking part wasn't the deal itself. It was the team list. Evelyn Drake, Chief Executive Officer. Tessa Rowan, no mention. Every major account I'd built was listed under her name. Every report I'd authored was stamped with hers. It wasn't just credit theft, it was identity erasure. My work, my years, my worth, all rebranded as hers. I didn't confront her again that day. I just smiled through the meeting, took notes I didn't need, and stayed late after everyone left. That's when I saw the email still open on her computer, unsent but fully drafted. It was to the board. "Tessa Rowan's performance has become unpredictable. I'm concerned about her decision-making and recent emotional volatility. I recommend we begin the transition process immediately." The timestamp: 10 minutes before I walked in. I remember staring at the screen until the words stopped being words. It wasn't just betrayal. It was a calculated burial. She wasn't cutting me out of the company. She was preparing to destroy my credibility before I ever realized I was under attack. That night, I didn't sleep. I stared at the skyline from my apartment window, the lights flickering like Morse code warnings. I thought about all the ways I had protected her, covered for her, worshipped her brilliance. I thought about how she smiled when she lied. By morning, my anger had gone cold. Not fiery. Not chaotic. Cold, measured. Deliberate. I copied the email. Saved it to a drive. And then, for the first time in 10 years, I started thinking like Evelyn Drake. If she could erase me from my own history, then I would rewrite hers. I started small. Password audits, access logs, old financial backups. I had clearance no one remembered to revoke. Every secret system she'd built to protect her power, I'd helped create. And I still knew where every digital lock lived. Then came the first discovery. A wire transfer: $1.4 million to a shell company named Elm Street Holdings. Authorized by Evelyn. Purpose: consulting. The same company name appeared 3 times in 5 years. Each payment larger than the last. I traced the registration. The address led to a P.O. box. The owner. A Richard Vale. Her late husband. The man who supposedly died 8 years ago. No death certificate. No public records. No burial. I didn't know what I'd found yet. But I knew it was something that could shatter her. So I smiled when she invited me for dinner that week. She wore a soft smile, poured the wine, asked how I'd been. Her warmth was almost motherly, if mothers gutted their daughters with velvet gloves. "You've been quiet," she said, eyes glinting. "Are you all right, dear?" "I'm fine," I said. "Just thinking about legacy. Yours, mine. How they intertwine." She laughed lightly, unaware or pretending to be. "That's why I've always liked you, Tessa. You see the big picture. Yes, I said, lifting my glass. And I always notice when someone tries to crop me out of it. She blinked. Just once. But it was enough. That night, as I left her penthouse, I made myself a promise. She wanted me erased. Instead, I'd make sure the world remembered her for everything she really was. And I already had her first secret. Would you like me to continue directly with part 2, the discovery and escalation phase? I did not confront Evelyn the next morning. I brought her coffee, thanked her for a revised deck I did not need, and spent the day being invisible in plain sight. People lower their guard when they think they have already deleted you. By noon I had access to 3 years of archived vendor folders and the internal approvals ledger that only finance and the CEO were supposed to see. Elm Street Holdings appeared again and again. It was a thread that never should have been in our fabric. Each invoice used the same language, the same signature block, the same innocuous description. Consulting. Strategic review. Executive mentorship. None of those services had deliverables. Meanwhile, every real vendor in our system had a scannable trail of drafts, redlines, and attachments. Elm Street was a ghost with a bank account. I needed someone who could move through systems without leaving tracks. That meant Priya Banerjee in security operations. Priya liked truth the way some people like espresso. She hated waste, loved puzzles, and owed me exactly one favor for getting a harassment claim quietly resolved when a client VP mistook her patience for permission. I found her in the server room with a screwdriver between her teeth and a terminal spitting logs like confetti. I handed her a coffee and a bag of almonds and said nothing until she finished what she was doing. When she looked up, I gave her one sentence. I need a read-only peek at archived finance approvals and board packets from 5 to 8 years ago. She tilted her head. For Evelyn or from her? For me, I said. For the company, if it turns out the company still matters. Priya studied me, then nodded. 30 minutes. Your desk. Bring no one. Back upstairs, I opened the document she dropped into a hidden folder on my drive. At first it looked clean. Too clean. Board minutes that read like advertising copy. Risk committee notes with nothing but adjectives. Then I found a line in a footnote the size of a splinter. The board had approved a legacy settlement after the death of Richard Vail. The beneficiary was a trust named North Atlas. The signatory was a private administrator. The counter-signatory was Evelyn. I dug into state filings. North Atlas linked to 2 properties, both owned by Shell LLCs. A condo facing the river. A cabin 3 hours north. Taxes paid on time. Utilities low but not zero. Someone had been there, often enough to keep the pipes from freezing. By late afternoon my eyes burned, my neck ached, and my hands had started to shake. I took a walk around the block to remember how to breathe. When I came back there was a post-it on my chair in neat capital letters that were not mine. You are looking in the right places. Do not use the office network for what comes next. No signature. No flourish. My first instinct was to assume Priya left it. My second was to admit she would have texted. I checked the hallway cameras through the reception console while the assistant went to refill her tea. The angle on my desk was obstructed by a glass serpentine sculpture. Clever placement. Deliberate. Someone had planned for blind spots. The note could have been there for hours. If someone inside the firm wanted Evelyn exposed, I had an ally I did not know. If Evelyn planted it, she wanted me to feel watched. Either way, I needed to move the next steps off the grid. I called an old client, Jordan Pike, who now ran a boutique firm that specialized in digital forensics for mergers gone bad. He owed me a favor for saving his acquisition when the target tried to hide debt behind optimistic revenue. We met at a bakery that smelled like warm sugar and clean steel. I told him I was advising a friend. He told me he did not care whose ghost I was chasing if the retainer cleared. I slid a list across the table. Shell companies. Trust names. A deceased executive with no certificate. I asked for quiet verification and a snapshot of current ownership. He quoted a number that would scare a reasonable person. I agreed before he finished the sentence. 2 hours later he called. The condo title had been transferred twice in the last year between LLCs with matching managers. The cabin was unchanged. The trust was funded by a conduit that looked like 3 layers of glass. When he dug 1 layer deeper, he found a human touch. A concierge physician in the city billed monthly visits to a patient named Vale with no first name. The bills went to North Atlas. The address for overnight lab draws was the riverfront condo. If this was true, Evelyn's late husband was not dead. If he was dead, someone had been borrowing his name in a way that required bloodwork. I set the phone down and stared at my reflection in the window. I looked like myself, but thinner around the eyes. Betrayal makes you lean. You shed anything that does not help you run. At 8 that night, the board chair, Amelia Cross, emailed me directly for the first time in months. Polite. Crisp. A request to join her for breakfast to discuss my career trajectory. Evelyn had already framed me as volatile. Amelia was either coming to observe the specimen or to offer me a humane exile. I replied yes and sent the location and time to a note on my private device. Then I made 2 lists. What to show Amelia if she wanted evidence. What to hold back if she wanted a clean narrative. I did not sleep. I read every Elm Street invoice until the numbers stopped being numbers. Breakfast was at a hotel where the napkins are heavier than most contracts. Amelia arrived precisely on time in a navy suit and a smile that belonged to a therapist and a prosecutor at once. She asked about my work, about how I was feeling, about whether I planned to stay at Drake and Vale after the merger. I told her I loved the company, that I wanted to build something real here. Then I slid my phone across the table with the one transfer that mattered most on the screen. She glanced down. Her pupils constricted. She did not touch the device. "Where did you get this?" she asked. "From a mistake," I said. "The kind people make when they believe no one intelligent is watching." She set her coffee down very carefully. "Tessa, you must not bring this to the full board without an airtight package. If it is wrong, you will be crushed. If it is right, you will be contested. Either way, you will be alone for a while. Can you live with that?" I told her I could. She believed me enough to slide a business card across the table with a handwritten number. "Call me when you have something that can survive discovery." When I reached the office, Evelyn was waiting in my chair. She did not bother with charm. She turned my monitor toward herself and ran a finger along the edge like a pianist warming up. "You have been busy," she said. I kept my face still. "Busy is the only currency you ever taught me." She stood and moved closer. I could smell her perfume, restrained and expensive. "There are things about this firm you do not understand. There are debts you cannot see from the cubicles. If you want a future here, you will leave governance to people who have already learned how to lose." I met her eyes. "You wrote a memo to the board calling me unstable." Her expression did not change. "If I wrote that, it would be because you are clearly exhausted. I would be doing you a kindness." I smiled in a way that felt almost kind. "Thank you for your concern." She left without looking back. 10 minutes later, my network credentials dropped for exactly 60 seconds and then returned. A subtle warning. Or a test to see which back door I would scramble for. I did not scramble. I packed a bag, left it under my desk, and walked out to the elevator with nothing but my wallet and the small USB drive in my pocket. If Elm Street paid a ghost, I needed to see the ghost. I drove to the riverfront building and waited in the lobby with a coffee I did not drink. At 4 in the afternoon, a private nurse in navy scrubs asked the concierge for a key. She went up with a simple black bag and came down 40 minutes later with 2 empties for biohazard collection. A courier took the red bin and left. I followed the nurse to the sidewalk and asked whether she was lost. She studied my face for a second and decided I could be trusted with a lie. "Just a wellness check on a family friend," she said. "Older gentleman. Very private." I thanked her and let her go. Then I called Jordan. "I need entry tonight." He protested. I added a 0. He protested with less conviction. At 11, while cleaners mopped halls and the concierge scrolled a phone, Jordan met me by the service elevator with badges that opened any door. The condo was spare and expensive, full of things that would not remember you if you left. We moved room to room. No photographs. No books. A single shaving kit on the sink. In the bedroom, a closet with 2 identical charcoal suits. A safe behind a panel that took Jordan 19 minutes to open. Inside were passport and a driver's license for Richard Vale, both renewed within the last 2 years. A thick envelope of cash. A fountain pen engraved with E&R. And a single photograph of Evelyn on a beach I did not recognize. She looked almost happy. The bathroom door clicked. Jordan froze. I froze. Water began to run in the shower. Someone else was in the condo. I had 1 second to choose between hiding and confronting. I chose neither. I stepped back into the hallway, closed the safe, and left the bedroom door ajar. If the man behind the bathroom door was truly dead, then I was about to meet a ghost who shaved at night. The shower kept running behind the closed door. Jordan mouthed a curse and started for the exit, but I shook my head. We waited. Steam drifted out under the crack, curling into the cold air like breath. When the water finally stopped, silence pressed so tightly that I could hear my pulse. The door opened. A man stepped out with a towel around his waist, older than the photos I had seen, his hair grey at the edges but his shoulders still straight. His eyes found mine instantly, sharp and cautious. For a heartbeat, neither of us spoke. Then he said my name. Tessa. The sound of it was wrong in his mouth, like he had practiced it. You're supposed to be dead, I said. He smiled faintly. That's a popular misunderstanding. Jordan shifted beside me, tense. I lifted a hand for him to stay back. Why keep the illusion? Why let her bury you? Because Evelyn is very good at making reality inconvenient, he said. And because once you've faked your own death for profit, coming back becomes poor taste. He walked to the dresser, pulled on a shirt, and spoke without looking at me. You're here because you found Elm Street. I told her someone would eventually trace it. I didn't think it would be you. You're funding her shell companies, I said. I was, he corrected. At first. Until she decided my silence was more useful than my partnership. I studied him carefully. He didn't look afraid. He looked tired, as if the years had been longer on him than on anyone else. Why did you fake it? I asked. For her, he said simply. She was going to lose the firm in the first recession. We built Elm Street to move money through the cracks. By the time it worked, we couldn't stop. Then she made it clear there was no room for both of us to stay alive. Jordan muttered, that's one way to file for divorce. Richard ignored him. You're collecting proof. Be careful. She doesn't leave loose ends. I'm not one, I said. He almost smiled again. Neither was I. The air thickened with the smell of soap and metal. He poured a drink, offered me none, and leaned against the counter. If you plan to expose her, you'll need more than numbers. She owns the story, Tessa. Every board member, every client, they believe she's the reason this firm still breathes. I can change that, I said. He looked at me the way Evelyn once had, assessing for weakness. Maybe. But ask yourself what happens after. You think taking her down makes you free. It makes you her. I'm already her, I said quietly. I just have a conscience. He laughed then, soft and bitter. Then you'll lose. When I left, the rain had started. Jordan was silent until we reached the car. You realize he's either the key or another trap. Both, I said. But either way, he talks like a man who knows where the bodies are. Back home, I found an email waiting in my private inbox. No sender name, no subject line. The body contained a single line. If you want the truth about Elm Street, follow the money through the holding trust. Start with your own payroll. My breath caught. I opened the finance archive again. My last 3 bonuses had come from an account labeled Executive Discretionary. That account's funding source traced back to Elm Street Holdings. Evelyn hadn't just been stealing from the company. She had been laundering the theft through me. I stared at my own pay stubs until they blurred, realizing how neatly she had set the trap. If the authorities ever found the transfers, my name would be the only one visible. I would be the perfect scapegoat, the loyal deputy who turned corrupt when no one was watching. I backed up every file to an external drive, hid it in a safety deposit box, and then printed one photograph. Evelyn shaking hands with the Valencorp CEO, smiling like a woman who had already won. I pinned it above my desk and wrote under it in black ink, "Not yet." The next morning, when I walked into the office, people looked at me differently. Whispers trailed in my wake, small and sharp. Something had shifted. Priya met my eyes as I passed her desk and shook her head once, almost imperceptibly. When I reached my office, security was waiting. 2 men in suits. A folder on my desk. "Tessa Rowan," one of them said, "we're conducting an internal investigation into financial irregularities involving your accounts." I smiled, cold and slow. "Of course you are." They escorted me to an empty conference room. On the table sat Evelyn Drake, flawless as ever, a picture of authority and disappointment. "Tessa," she said gently, "this is difficult for me. But the board has reason to believe you've been moving funds through a personal network of shell companies. We found your name attached to payments from Elm Street Holdings." I let the silence stretch until it almost snapped. "You're good," I said. "But you made one mistake." She arched a brow. "And what's that?" I leaned forward, just enough for her to see the truth in my eyes. "You taught me everything you know." Her smile didn't falter, but her eyes did. That was the moment I knew, the real war had begun. The suspension email arrived before sunrise. "Administrative leave pending investigation." The language was neutral, the intent surgical. Evelyn wanted me out of the building, away from my files. Before I had the chance to pull the trigger she didn't know I already had cocked. I made coffee I didn't drink and sat by the window watching the city wake up. It was strange how normal everything looked when your life was being quietly erased. I thought of my first day at Drake and Vale, how proud I'd been to wear the badge, how Evelyn had told me, "You'll never need to raise your voice if you learn how to make silence work for you." She had used silence to bury me. Now it was my weapon too. By noon, news had already started leaking internally. "Financial misconduct," whispered through hallways like perfume. A few sympathetic colleagues texted vague encouragement. Others stayed quiet, calculating their odds. Priya, brave and subtle, sent a single emoji, a padlock. It meant my backups were safe. She'd encrypted the drives on her end before the IT audit began. I wasn't going to defend myself through company channels. That's exactly what Evelyn wanted. I needed a different stage. So I called Amelia Cross. "Tell me you have something," she said. "I have enough to start a storm," I replied. "But if I throw it wrong, it lands on me." "Then don't throw it," she said. "Place it. Gently." That evening we met in the back of a restaurant that served executives who liked to pretend they were discreet. Amelia came alone, no bodyguard, no assistant. She listened as I laid out everything: Elm Street, the forged transfers, the dead husband who wasn't, the false bonuses. Her expression didn't change, but her knuckles went white around her glass. "You're saying she funded her merger with stolen assets and then used your name as a laundering front," she summarized. "Exactly." "Can you prove it?" "Yes. But not in court yet. I need access to one last archive, the merger documentation Evelyn kept offline." Amelia nodded. "The data vault." Drake and Vale's internal data vault was a physical server locked behind biometric security. Only 3 people had full clearance: the head of IT, the CFO, and Evelyn Drake. Amelia leaned forward. "You can't walk in there. Not legally." "I don't need to," I said. "I just need to get Evelyn to open it for me." She tilted her head. "And how do you plan to do that?" "I'll give her a reason to." The next morning, I requested a private meeting. Evelyn agreed, confident as ever, dressed in winter white like innocence made human. She smiled as I entered her office. "I'm surprised you wanted to see me," she said. "Most people hide when their reputations start burning." "I wanted to give you something," I said. I placed a sealed envelope on her desk. She didn't touch it. "What's this?" "Leverage," I said. "A full audit trail of every payment tied to Elm Street. Names, dates, access points, the trust accounts, even North Atlas." Her eyes flickered, the first break in composure I'd seen in years. You wouldn't have that. I do, I said softly. And if I go down, it all goes public. She regarded me for a long time. You're bluffing. Then call it. The silence stretched. Then she stood, walked to the wall safe behind her desk, and pressed her palm against the scanner. The steel door clicked open. Inside, an encrypted drive sat beneath stacks of legal folders. Evelyn retrieved it and turned back to me. If we're doing this dance, Tessa, let's do it properly. She plugged the drive into her computer, fingers moving with sharp precision. Folders bloomed on the screen, decades of correspondence, wire confirmations, scanned signatures. She turned the monitor so I could see. Here's your proof, she said. Everything you think you know, and more. But the truth, my dear, is boring without context. She opened one folder labeled Executives, Personal. Inside were digital copies of employee files. My name sat near the top. She clicked it open. The file contained false invoices, doctored bank statements, falsified reports, all meticulously crafted to make me look guilty. My heart pounded as she smiled. You see, she said. Even when they find Elm Street, the trail ends with you. The perfect apprentice, undone by ambition. I let her finish. Then I smiled. You should really look at your backup protocol more carefully. Her brow furrowed. Those files you just opened. I said. They're from the clone server. The one Priya mirrored last week. The real vault is already in Amelia's hands. For the first time since I'd met her, Evelyn Drake looked afraid. You didn't think I'd walk in here without insurance, did you? I said quietly. Her hand trembled slightly as she closed the folder. What do you want? Not money, I said. Not even your company. Then what? An audience, I said. Tomorrow's board meeting. You'll tell them everything yourself. She laughed, brittle and sharp. You overestimate your power. Maybe, I said. But you underestimate what happens when your ghost husband walks into the room with a microphone. Her color drained. I turned to leave, but paused at the door. You built your empire on manipulation. I'm just giving you the one thing you never planned for. And what's that? She asked. Witnesses. Then I walked out, leaving her staring at the empty doorway. That night, I called Richard Vale. He didn't sound surprised. She's unraveling, I said. She always does when someone holds up a mirror, he replied. Will you come tomorrow? He hesitated. If I do, there's no going back. That's the point. When I hung up, I realized my hands were steady for the first time in weeks. Tomorrow would end everything one way or another. The boardroom smelled of polished wood and stale coffee, two scents that suddenly felt like the last defenses of a kingdom. The table was a long blade of varnished oak, and around it sat the people who had kept this firm alive by pretending not to see the dirt under the rugs. Cameras had been allowed in. Lawyers were present. My heart beat the way it had the night I first presented to a hostile client. Steady, focused, practiced. Evelyn entered with the sort of calm that had built her. Her suit was immaculate, her smile curated. When she saw me, something like a flash passed across her face, then she closed it, the way you close a wound with practiced hands. Amelia spoke first, brief and clinical. She read the motion I had asked her to put on the table. She would allow a special session, a public review of the Elm Street transactions, the North Atlas Trust, the transfers tied to executive discretionary funds. She would call external counsel. She would not allow this to be swept under another rug. The boardroom hummed. Papers shifted. Phones lit. I had prepared for chaos and for polite silence. I had not prepared for how fast the room could lean toward truth once someone opened the window. Jordan sat at the far end, nondescript in a dark sweater and less tired than the man I had met in the bedroom. He read aloud the forensics he had pulled that morning. He described the safe in the riverfront condo, the passport renewals, the pattern of wire transfers. He explained how metadata had been preserved and how a cloned server had been planted to catch anyone trying to scrub evidence. Priya was next. She walked the board through a timeline of internal approvals tied to the Elm Street payments. She showed the cryptic line items and the tiny, deliberate authorizations that linked those payments to my payroll. She explained how the clone server had saved a mirror of Evelyn's real vault and how Amelia now held the only original copy that mattered. Evelyn listened, her fingers folded. When it was her turn, she rose and gave a statement that had been polished by the best PR counsel money could buy. She spoke of tough decisions during hard times, of loyalty to the firm, of the need to stabilize and protect employees. She framed every transaction as an act of preservation, a utilitarian decision made with the firm's future in mind. At the back of the room someone coughed, soft and deliberate. The door opened. Richard Vale walked in looking exactly like a man who had been given the terrible gift of time. He wore an unremarkable jacket and carried a small leather folder. His eyes hunted the room until they found hers. For a second both of them were children again, and the air between them shifted to something raw. When he spoke, no recorder could do justice to the tremor under his voice. He spoke of a plan that had gone too far, of a partnership corrupted by fear, of decisions made not out of love but out of the terror of losing everything. He described how his death had been arranged, how payments had been rerouted, how names had become instruments. He did not exonerate Evelyn completely. He described complicity, manipulation, and the slow rot of trust. He said her name as plainly as anyone could. Evelyn Drake authorized these moves. The boardroom moved faster than I expected. Amelia put forward a motion for immediate suspension pending the full legal review. Votes were taken. Marcus's place at the table was empty. He had been called in earlier and asked not to attend while the firm managed the optics. The vote passed. Evelyn protested, her voice steady, then wavering, then scanning the faces she had long commanded. She asked for the opportunity to defend herself in court, to allow fairness, to avoid spectacle. She argued that she had saved the firm at a cost. The board listened with exhaustion, as if they had finally been handed a truth they had suspected but never wanted to handle. Outside, the news outlets smelled blood. A press release crafted by Amelia was fed to one trusted reporter and then outed to the rest. Within an hour the headline the firm feared most began to fracture the city's conversations. The legal wheels began to turn. A DA listened that afternoon, and by evening a subpoena was served. I watched the crisp papers move from hand to hand like falling leaves. There was no triumphant gavel strike. There was only the steady machinery of consequence. When the board meeting ended, a small cluster gathered in the stairwell. Priya put a hand on my shoulder. Jordan nodded with that tired, grateful look that comes when risk pays off. Amelia, who had been cool and impenetrable all morning, reached out and squeezed my hand in a private gesture. It was a simple human thing, as if to say she had seen me and would not pretend she had not. I returned to my desk that day to an inbox flooded with messages. Some were condolences. Some were threats. Some were offers. An ECG monitor beeped in my head as adrenaline ebbed and a quiet kind of grief took its place, the grief for a self that had been partial to one particular kind of loyalty, for a decade of work that I had to strip down and show to the light. But I had the evidence stored where no one could touch it. I had people who would testify. And I had the knowledge that the man who had been dead was standing by, willing to speak a truth that rearranged a life. Evelyn was escorted from the building that week, a legal team following. The company she had built would not die overnight, nor would it be saved cleanly. The authorities would unravel what they could. The press would narrate and reshuffle and hunger for details. There would be trials, depositions, and long months of legal thorns. Marcus, when he returned, found a different room. His complicity had been easier to prove than any of us expected. He had signed for vendor payments and cashed checks. He had been greedy in ways that left footprints. He was suspended and then removed. His future was a series of legal consultations and frantic phone calls to creditors. He sent one short message to me before he disappeared from the firm. I thought I was saving us. The message stayed unread. What I did not do was take the empty throne. Offers came, and not just from within. Recruiters called, partners sent handshakes preloaded with congratulations. I bought no suits that week. I learned something Evelyn had never understood. Leadership without the trust of those who must follow is an empty office. Instead I met with people who believed in a different measure of work. Priya, Jordan, Amelia, Some of them surprised me by asking if I wanted to help rebuild the firm on new terms of transparency. I helped, where I could, but I also opened another file, smaller and quieter, a business plan for something that did not rely on silences. It was a consultancy devoted to ethics and to making sure small companies had the sort of counsel that reduces the hunger for dirty shortcuts. It would be a different kind of success, slower and less gilded, but it would be mine. Richard and I met after the press died down. He apologized in ways that had nothing to do with legal absolution. He spoke of regret and of a man who had loved badly and been loved badly in return. He told me he would clear as much as he could, that he wanted to make amends where possible. I listened. I forgave in a way that kept me safe, not naive. In the months that followed, the city watched as the case unfolded. Evelyn stood in court, sharp as ever, and gave the kind of defense that snarled for sympathy. Evidence was compiled. Witnesses were called. I testified. It was not sweet. It was necessary. When the dust had mostly settled, when the news cycle moved on and new outrage supplanted ours, I sat once at my new desk, a modest room with a plant and a window that looked out over a quiet street. The work was not over. There were clients who needed protection from predators. There were systems to audit and policies to write. There were young people who needed to learn that loyalty married to silence is complicity. I thought of Evelyn sometimes, not with hatred but with a clarity that is the rarest of gifts. She had taught me power. She had also taught me how to expose it. I had not set out to destroy a person. I had set out to preserve my integrity. On the day I opened the new office, a client walked in and said, "You look different. You look like someone who kept her hands clean." I smiled, thinking of the quiet file in my safe and the long list of people who helped me keep it whole. Power can be stolen. Power can be wielded. Power can be given back, shaped into something that does not require lives as collateral. It is messy and imperfect. It is human. I did not want the empty gratitude of a firm rebuilt on fear. I wanted a practice where contracts bore teeth and ethics had weight. I wanted a legacy that did not live in a ledger hidden behind a false death. That work was humble. It was right. And when I looked at the city from that smaller window, I felt the truth settle like settled snow. It was not a triumph I had imagined in the fevered nights of planning. It was something quieter, a life uncluttered by silent debts, a name I could sign without flinching, a future that would let me sleep with my hands untied.